welcome to another virtual Zookeeper Feed talk. My name is Larissa. I'm part of the animal care team here at the BC Wildlife Park. And before we get started with our raven encounter, I just wanted to start off by acknowledging that the BC Wildlife Park sits on the unceded and traditional territory of the Zookeeeper First Nations, sometimes referred to as the Shuswap peoples. And so we are going to be going inside with Igor the raven today. We're going to be going into a double entry system here. So Julie, you'll just follow on behind me here. Just close this up. We'll see if we can get Igor to come over to his little station here. Igor, your station? So we never really know what kind of behavior we're going to be receiving out of Igor today. He is a very rambunctious individual, so hopefully he'll be willing to participate in some of our training here. Igor, station? If not, that's okay. So we'll go on in here, Julie. And then we'll just get this door closed up behind us. So we'll see if we can get Igor to do a bit of targeting. Target. Really curious about there, Julie. So what we're gonna do is we've actually brought what's called an enrichment in for Igor. There's some color spatches on there. He seems really curious of it right now. So we're gonna put it down and see if he'll create a masterpiece for us. Come check that out.
What are those sounds he's making, Larissa?
So that is a bit of a dominance vocalization right now. So you can see that the feathers on the top of his head and on his throat are quite fluffed up right now. So that is a dominance display that you'll typically see from a raven. It's also pretty curious because I don't usually have a bucket of food. I usually have a smaller dish. He's pretty curious of this info right now. So normally Igor will come and stand on this station before we enter into the exhibit here. And what we were trying to get him to do was a bit of target training. So Igor has learned that if he touches his beak to the edge of our target bowl and move to different areas of the exhibit, then he'll get the food rewards, which he's getting right now is a small amount of kibble. Ravens are omnivores, so he will also get some protein in the diet, which is a bit of beef steaks for him today. And then also an assortment of some fruits and vegetables. Now, Igor has been here at the Wildlife Park ever since 2012. He actually came here as an orphan, so he was believed to be abducted from a nest at some point in his early life. It was actually hand-raised in two separate households before he came to the Wildlife Park here in 2012. So because of this, Igor is what we call an imprinted bird. And so he actually acts towards people the same way that he would to other ravens. So we see a lot of his behavior of aggression, affection, and sometimes even mating behaviors towards the keepers. So what we'll do is we'll try to see if we can get some of his other enrichment put out here too, Julie. So this is a little bit of jello that I made with some grapes and strawberries. And then we'll see if he does want to go down to the painting at some point too. He didn't do too much on that. Did step on it very briefly. Yeah. Very good, Igor. And then I'll also grab his enrichment just inside this keeper area here, because he'll love to wish for me. ravens are known pretty worldwide for being very mysterious and intriguing individuals. They also can be quite destructive. So what we've got in some of his enrichments in here today, some of it has part of his diet, but some also does contain fur that has come from our sheep at the Home Hardware family farm. Now, ravens, as I mentioned, can be found pretty worldwide. They can be found pretty much across all of the northern hemisphere. So that means that they can live in habitats that are as cold as above the Arctic Circle to also down and close to Central America. So they do have a wide range of habitats that they can encompass, and they have a lot of folklore behind them as well. So in the Greek mythology, they are believed to be related to prophecy, because they were related to Apollo, which was the Greek god of prophecy. In Nordic culture, they are believed to be also had been with Odin, who was the god, and he had two pairs of ravens, which were Hugin and Munin, which were named Thought and Memory. So these guys are actually some of the most intelligent birds in the world. In some northwest coastal First Nations, the raven is actually known as the trickster and a transformative character, and can be credited actually with some of their creation stories in that area. And in one particular story is also credited for the creation of the spirit bear. So depending on where they are found worldwide, there is a lot of folklore and mysterious behind them. And depending on where they live is how they tend to be socializing with people. In some places of the world, like the mid-eastern United States, they're actually quite prosecuted against killing and eating livestock. So in some of those areas, they're actually a lot more shy. Whereas in areas like the Pacific Northwest coast, they tend to be pretty social around people because they were revered in those cultures.
How old is Igor?
We don't know exactly how old Igor is because he was already an adult when he was brought into our rehab hospital. But he again has been here ever since 2012, so at least 8 years old, but could be a little bit older than that. The oldest raven that was known in captivity was 22 years old, and he was banded in Nova Scotia. As you can, sorry, did you have a question there?
How old would they live in the wild?
Typically, you can get them to be on average about 8 to 10 years. But again, most ravens and most animals are going to be living a bit longer in human care because there is no predators, and they do have access to health care if they need. And so ravens are actually believed to be just these big black birds, but now that we get some sunshine on Igor, you can actually see that there's a lot of iridescence to their color as well. So really beautiful blue, purples, and green colors to them. Now they are also the largest songbird in the world. So not many people would believe these birds to be a songbird, but they have a lot of vocalizations in their repertoire. They've been known to have more than 33 different categories of vocalizations. And they are also known to be able to mimic other birds, and they can even mimic human words as well. Is that Igor? There you go. So that's just a little bit of beak cleaning behavior that he's doing there. Good job, Igor. Now, typically, when people ask about the differences between a crow and a raven, they are in the crow family. So that's the family of Corvidae, and that also includes magpies and your jays. But they are typically bigger than a crow. One of the ways that you can tell them apart is by the raven has a much larger and thicker beak, and they do also have a lot more of those shaggy throat feathers as well. When they're flying, these guys have a wingspan of about 4 feet, and they do also have a lot more separation in their wings. And they also have a bit more of a wedge-shaped tail compared to a crow. It's perfect.
And why does he always have his mouth open?
So right now it is a little bit warm, but because we do also have you in here, Julie, who he's not as used to seeing every single day, sometimes having that beak open just means that he is feeling a little bit nervous. But it is also quite warm too, and he's been flying around quite a bit. This exhibit is actually equipped with a bit of a sprinkler system. So in the summertime when he gets incredibly warm, if we happen to see any of that behavior, we will actually turn the sprinklers on and he'll have himself a bit of a shower. Now I've got a lot of stuff in here too. I haven't even had a chance to have that yet. Now these guys are also very big hiders of food, so they'll do what's called caching behavior. So if Igor is not too incredibly hungry, he'll actually go and hide a lot of his food around the exhibit, and he'll use various objects in here to hide it. They will also re-hide a lot of their food if they think another animal is watching.
Do ravens mate for life?
They typically do, yes. It is not uncommon that if a mate dies that they will take another mate on, but typically they will mate for life once they've found a suitable partner. They're not reaching sexual maturity until they are about 3 or 4 years old, however. So that is a little bit of caching behavior that we're seeing there right now, Julie. Now, pretty interestingly enough, within the last year and a half, we've started seeing different mating behaviors with Igor that we hadn't really seen before. So you may have seen some of that footage on some of our other videos as well. But that's that tail vibrating behavior that you may have seen on some of the videos. And it is pretty typical to see that behavior in both males and females. And even though I say Igor as a he, it is very possible that Igor could be a she. It's hard to see from where we are right now, but Igor has been very busy this spring constructing a nest in the exhibit. Now, typically it will be both the male and female that are constructing the nest. However, it's just going to be the female that sits on the nest. Yeah, absolutely.
And what are you feeding Igor right now?
Right now, those are those pieces of steak bits that I was mentioning.
Ooh.
And Julie, you may actually get a chance to see a little bit of the nest underneath the shelter there. It's pretty protective of it, so we won't go too much closer than that. But you can see that Igor has gone and taken various sticks that I've put into the exhibit and been really busy constructing that nest. He's also gone and put a couple of his enrichment toys in there, as well as some bison fur that's been in here as well. He's been very busy with that. So I'm just going to go and put the rest of his diet around the exhibit here, and this allows Igor to go and search around for the rest of his diet.
So if anyone has any final questions, you can just pop them in the question section there, and Zookeeper Larissa will be able to answer those for us.
So that's a pretty big jackpot there. That's just a piece of bone that had a little bit of his meat left.
How many offspring will they usually have at a time?
They'll usually have between 1 to 4 eggs. So depending on if they all end up hatching, that's typically the amount of offspring that they can have. And they do spend a lot of time with their parents in comparison to other members of the corvid family. So they will actually not have feathers on their body until they're about 40 days old. Good job. Now typically you will only see a pair of ravens. They're not as social as what you'll see with crows. So typically if you do see a group of ravens together, it's usually juvenile ravens that haven't paired up for their mating yet.
How heavy is a full-size raven?
Igor's average size is about 1 kilogram, so just over 2 pounds, but they can weigh up to about 3 pounds at times.
And how long have you been working with Igor?
I've been Igor's primary keeper for about 3 years now, and we've built quite a relationship in that time. It does take a lot of time to gain the trust of a raven, but I actually am in some of his training able to get him to allow me to touch over his body on his beak, and that allows me to actually assess some of his body condition as well to see how his muscular is developing. Igor's also trained for several of those other behaviors, like I mentioned with the target training. Right now we're working on a crate training behavior as well. And Igor will sometimes, when he's in the mood, step up onto a scale for me. And so he will voluntarily weigh himself as well.
And why do you crate train him?
Igor is crate trained in case of any type of emergency where we do have to get them out of the exhibit. So whether that be if we're doing any big maintenance around the exhibit, if we ever have any emergency situations with fires or floods, it's just easier if the animal is comfortable going into that crate. It minimizes the amount of stress that is involved with having to be moved. So if we can get him to voluntarily do that, it's always just going to be so much better for the welfare of the animal.
And then one final question, what made you call him Igor?
Igor is actually named that when I first started, so I'm not too sure who in our animal care department ended up picking that name, but I think it's definitely pretty suiting, and it'll be very interesting to see if Igor is a male or a female. We are actually going to be doing some DNA sexing this year to find out for sure whether or not Igor is male or female, so that'll be a nice surprise.
So stay tuned for that reveal, everyone. How far will a raven fly in search of food?
Well, they typically are pretty territorial, so they'll find a territory that is pretty abundant in food, and they will defend that territory quite readily. But they are not a migratory bird by any means, so they are a resident. So they, again, because they are an omnivore and they're very opportunistic, they don't have to travel too incredibly far to find food sources. He's probably finding a spot that he can hide that, and I can guarantee you that he's going to go and re-hide it somewhere afterwards. So they're always very vigilant to see if we're watching. Good job, Igor.
Wonderful. So thanks so much for tuning in, everyone, and stay tuned for our next Zookeeper Live. We'll be posting that within the next few days. Thanks so much, everyone.